If you ever are on vacation visiting the Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome and you hear bones rattling inside one of the tombs near the nave, whatever current pope is probably about to die. That's been the legend for centuries, with rattling bones which belonged to Pope Sylvester II, who died in 1003 and has reportedly been warning the Church of papal deaths from inside his tomb ever since. Sylvester II became the kind of pope whose bones rattle in the dark starts about 60 years earlier, with a boy named Gerbert, born sometime around 945 in southern France. This legend tends to involve forbidden books, like a deal with the devil on a Spanish beach. Gerbert grew up and received his early education at a monastery school, where students learned the triviums such as grammar, logic, and rhetoric. But Gerbert's mind wanted more than the standard foundation could offer, and by the time he was ready for what came next, covering mathematics and astronomy, he ran into a problem. The teaching of those subjects had essentially disappeared from France, and if he wanted to learn them, he had to go find them somewhere else. Because of that, traveled long distance and went to Spain. This matters as context since, in the 10th century, the majority of Spain was controlled by the Caliphate of Cordoba. This remained the last holdout of the Umayyad dynasty after the Abbasid Revolution in 750. Islamic scholarship in Cordoba was extraordinary, with astronomy at a level that Christian Europe had largely lost access to since the fall of Rome. Gerbert went to where the knowledge was and got an education that essentially wasn't available anywhere else in the Christian world. He also, according to legend, made a friend, a Muslim philosopher, generous with his knowledge, who taught Gerbert a great deal, including the use of the abacus as a means of calculation. There was one book the philosopher would not share. It contained the secrets of his art, including the full depth of his knowledge. No matter how Gerbert pleaded, the philosopher refused. He appealed to their friendship. The philosopher refused. He appealed to the love of God. The philosopher refused. Even when he thought offering money could work, still no. Gerbert then changed his approach entirely by seducing the philosopher's daughter. And one night, together, they got the philosopher drunk enough to pass out and then stole the book from under his pillow while he slept. Gerbert fled into the night without the girl, leaving her behind the moment he had what he actually came for. The philosopher, upon waking and discovering what happened, used his knowledge of the stars for the ability to divine a person's location through astrology, specifically to track Gerbert across the vast countryside. Gerbert realized he was being traced and hatched the kind of solution that only makes sense in legend. He suspended himself beneath a bridge, hanging in the space between earth and water, while touching neither. The philosopher's divination could not find him, because he was in neither element. He couldn't stay under a bridge forever, though. He knew the philosopher would eventually find another way, so Gerbert made a decision that is the worst decision in the story. On the Spanish coast, he performed a dark ritual and summoned the devil, which surprisingly was straightforward as infernal pacts go. Gerbert's soul for all eternity, in exchange for protection from the philosopher and transportation back to France. The devil agreed, so that Gerbert could go ahead to cross the Mediterranean. However, the same philosopher presumably never caught up with him. Back in France, Gerbert did something interesting with the situation. He built a mechanical head, a device that could answer yes or no questions with complete accuracy, and used it to interrogate his own future. Two questions specifically that should be posed here. First, would he become pope? The head said yes. Second, would he die before he sang mass in Jerusalem? The head said no. That second answer was the important one granted. It told Gerbert exactly what he needed to know to stay alive. As long as he never traveled to Jerusalem, the devil couldn't collect. He had his insurance policy. That way, he could pursue the highest office in Christendom with confidence. Back in France, Gerbert began teaching when he reintroduced the quadrivium, geometry, music, and astronomy. He taught the abacus. More importantly, he brought back knowledge that Christian Europe had essentially forgotten, all of which he did it through the same intellectual networks he had built in Spain. Over time, two of his students would become among the most powerful people in the world, with the first being Robert, who became King of France. Robert appointed Gerbert Archbishop of Reims, to be fair, a significant position. While there, Gerbert kept demonstrating the kind of intellectual capability that made people deeply suspicious. He constructed a mechanical clock, then he built a hydraulic organ powered by heated water. Both remarkable achievements for the 10th century, and both the kind of thing that raised eyebrows. The second student was even more important. Otto III would become Holy Roman Emperor. The Pope was appointed by the Holy Roman Emperor. Gerbert had, whether by design or luck, taught the man who would have the power to put him in the chair he had been promised. In 999, the year before the millennium, with the apocalyptic weight that date carried for medieval Christians, Otto appointed Gerbert first as Archbishop of Ravenna, and then, shortly after, as Pope. Gerbert took the name Sylvester II, meaning the mechanical head had been right. What's more of a major plot twist in this story is the fact Pope Sylvester was preparing to say Mass one Sunday at the Basilica of Santa Croce in Rome. What Sylvester apparently did not know, or perhaps failed to remember, was that the basilica contained soil brought from Jerusalem itself, carried to Rome by the mother of the Emperor Constantine, Helena. In the 4th century, the soil was the reason the church's full name is Santa Croce in Gerusalemme. Technically, and in matters of infernal contracts, technicality is everything. When Sylvester sang Mass in Santa Croce, he was singing Mass in Jerusalem. That was the devil that wanted his due. The more restrained accounts say Sylvester began to feel unwell the moment Mass ended. Realizing what was happening and what it meant, he reportedly asked that his hand and his tongue be separated from his body. Every part that had blasphemed God through the pact, all before burial. He died later that day, and it was discovered his instructions had been a desperate last attempt to protect what remained of his soul. The less restrained versions say that hell itself opened in Santa Croce during the Mass. Satan and his demons then arrived in person to collect what was owed. It's said that the devil plucked out Sylvester's eyes, and the demons played with them in the nave of the church. Take your pick of what makes more sense. But either way, Sylvester was hastily buried in St. John Lateran Basilica, where his tomb still sits. The inscription on the tomb in Latin reads, "This place will yield to the sound the limbs of buried Sylvester at the advent of the Lord." The Latin was commonly misread as, "This place will make a sound," which gave rise to the belief that when a pope is about to die, Sylvester's bones rattle inside the tomb as a warning, which could be a signal from beyond. Or perhaps, depending on interpretation, as Satan himself clapping at another fallen successor of St. Peter. In the mid-1600s, during renovations to the Lateran Basilica, workers opened Sylvester's tomb. According to accounts from the time, his body showed no signs of decay, as intact as the day he was buried. Then, allegedly, the spell broke where his body disintegrated to ash the moment it was exposed to air. Even 600 years after his death, the legend was still generating new chapters. The whole story, in the form we know it, comes primarily from an English monk named William of Malmesbury. William mainly wrote about Sylvester more than 100 years after his death. William himself acknowledged that some might regard all of this as fiction, and noted that it was commonly said of scholars who excelled at science that they must have served the devil. He wasn't endorsing the legend entirely. More so, he was recording what was generally believed. Going back to Cardinal Benno of San Martino e Silvestro, the man that claimed in a pamphlet Sylvester had consorted with dark powers. Cardinal Benno was writing during the investiture controversy, a major political and theological dispute over who had the authority to appoint bishops and church officials. As for the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor, Benno was on the emperor's side. Calling the Pope a sorcerer who had made his career through an infernal deal was contextually a political attack dressed up as theology. So the legend of the Devil Pope started as a pamphlet written by a political opponent, more than a century after the man was dead. But here's the thing about Sylvester II that the legend makes beyond obscure. He was genuinely extraordinary because he reintroduced scientific knowledge to Christian Europe. He brought back the abacus, and he may have introduced the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. He built mechanical devices that his contemporaries found inexplicable, curious in a time of the world that treated curiosity about certain subjects as dangerous. The legend grew not only because he had political enemies, but because his actual capabilities were difficult to explain within the framework understood to be possible. When someone does things nobody else can explain, the explanations people reach for tend to involve forces beyond the natural. In the 10th century, those forces had a name, and his name was on a pamphlet.